folks, it's been some time since you guys have seen the four-wheel drive Gravely tractor. I think it was in 2019 for Pennsylvania Plow Day was the last set of videos I had on it. And unfortunately, I ended up seizing the rear planetary halfway through that plow day, actually halfway through the morning on my second pass, because I didn't have enough oil in the rear transmission. So I made a video on that. Some of you might remember from later in 2019 when I fixed the orbital gear that goes around the sun gear. The bushing on it had seized. So obviously enough, I have plenty of oil in the rear transmission now. And nothing else has really changed on this except for the front tires. I finally found the correct size 612 ags that I was looking for. I had ag tires on it, but they were from a 50s walk-behind tractor, so they had a smaller profile. But aside from that, everything's remained the same. So today we're going to be bringing this down to the garage, getting the thing power washed, and just taking care of a few items on it before we head south for plow day this weekend. Alright, so the four-wheel drive's all cleaned up, blew off what little dirt was on it, and of course all the mold from sitting around in the mildew and everything over the past few years. So we don't have too much to do on this. I do have to mount another set of Jacobsen 50-pound wheel weights on either side. They're 50 pounds apiece on the front, now that I have my new ag tires on there, or new to me ag tires, because the ones that were on it were over here. And I had cleaned these up and tubed them back when plow day was coming up in 2019. They're very nice tires, but the profile is probably about an inch or so shorter than what the normal 6x12 ags are. And it was kind of nose diving down in the front, and I got these ones from a friend of mine who took them off of his wheel horse. They're BFGs, Silvertons, and they're very nice tires, so those mounted up there well. So we have to do that. We also have to change out my PTO shaft, because unfortunately the one I used in this was pretty well whipped, and you might be able to see down in here the U-joint has got a lot of play in it. And of course when this thing pivots, it ends up pivoting right over this part of the U-joint here, which is how I designed it. That way there wasn't much give and take on the slip yoke for the drive shaft. So I'm going to take the one out of the four-wheel drive dump truck out back, because that thing's been sitting longer than this thing has, and I ended up putting all new U-joints into that when I built it. So we'll change that out into here, and then of course it's just going to be a general greasing and once over and just making sure everything's up to snuff for this weekend. So hopefully we can get more than a row and a half in with this thing and quite possibly have a full day of plowing. So this is what the four-wheel drive Gravely dump truck has succumbed to after sitting up here all these years. I can't even remember when this thing ran last. And of course, for those of you that don't know, I ended up building a bunch of four-wheel drive Gravely's with the same joint design here in the middle. Back in, I did one, this one was done in 2012. I did one for a customer in 2013. And of course, the one that you guys saw down in the driveway was built in 2014 and modified a bunch of times over the years. And unfortunately this one just doesn't get used anymore, but it does have a good PTO shaft, which is a quick disconnect one, providing I can do this with one hand. Alright, so it's a little tough to get this thing out because this quick disconnect coupler sits right up against this plate, so you have no room behind it to get your fingers into there to pull it. So with the help of a pry bar, that came off. And of course the other end is up here because I was using it for something a couple of years ago, and that's it right there. And I remember having, I believe I had this piece made at the local drive shaft place, or vice versa. Can't remember what it was, but they're nice tight U-joints, so we can put those onto the four-wheel drive. So before I go and put these onto the tractor, I am going to run them through my parts washer here and clean them up a little bit. So upon looking at the male end a little bit more, unfortunately this drive shaft does have a little bit of play up and down. I kind of doubt you guys will be able to see it, but it's got play this way but none that way. So most likely I think it was this end that I had made because I needed another one of these quick disconnects. But either way, it does have less than the one on the four-wheel drive now. So we get these cleaned up, dried off, and then we can pull the one out of the tractor and then slip this in. Drive shaft cleaned up nice, all the old grease is off of it. The other nice thing about this too is it actually has greasable U-joints in here, and unfortunately this one never did. So this one does not have quick disconnects. As you can see, I ended up putting, well, maybe you can't see, there we go. I ended up putting set screws in this because I didn't have the quick disconnects on, so I think I just drilled out those holes and put the set screws in. And I'm pretty sure that this has enough travel where I can collapse it and pull it out of here. The most I'll probably have to do is take off my steering piston and pivot this tractor in order to get this shaft out of here. Alright, those should be backed off enough. Excellent. There we go. Alright, so I went ahead and I greased up the drive shaft before it goes back in. So I'm just going to do the same to these splines here. I don't know if you can see, but this transmission does leak out of this PTO plate a little bit, which I'm okay with because that means I know it has enough oil in there, and hopefully we won't seize a rear planetary down at Plow Day this year. And I did notice that this PTO here in the front, unfortunately, you might not be able to see it on camera, but it's got some back and forth play in that plate. Probably from getting hammered by that worn out PTO and rattling around. Which I do have more of those PTO plates here, but I also don't have time today to pull this all apart and change the plate out. So that's how it's going to stay for now. Alright, front end is on. And I don't know if it's going to make the back or not. I don't think it's gonna. Alright, so unfortunately, we are going to have to split this thing apart to do this. We don't have to move it far, and I do remember having to do this to one of my other ones. So all I have to do is just take out this bolt here on the top and that bolt there on the bottom, because they just have pivot bushings in there, and then we can slide this thing apart about a ½ inch and slide this drive shaft back in. So I have a small floor jack under the front half of this, because this thing is front heavy and it always wants to tip that way just because the engine hanging out. Alright, so we got to unbolt the steering tower and the hydraulic tank. Okay, our top bolt's out. bottom one's about to be out. Now if this goes according to plan. Of course my legs are under this under this too, by the way. Alright, that should be enough, because it don't take much to spread this thing apart. Alright, that's all we were looking to do right there. Alright folks, drive shaft is in and our 3-point hitch is all greased up. Unfortunately you saw that I had to oil these bushings that I put in on the back, because when I put these grease fittings in here, they were just holes where set screws are, because these are just locking collars, and I only ended up tacking the fittings on either side, and unfortunately I should have welded them all the way around, because now under pressure the grease squishes out of the gap where I didn't weld, so you can't push grease into them. So I have to just grease it up, just oil it up with a can, which isn't too big of a deal. And hopefully the hydraulics on this are okay. This pump on this thing seems to be a little slow with the 3-point, but it runs the steering just fine. And I don't know if there is some kind of bypass valve in this steering box, or if it's just a very weak pump, because there's a Power Beyond line that comes out of that steering box that runs the valve and the piston in the back, and then everything loops back to the return on the back side, as you can see. But when the engine's wound up, everything seems to be okay. So hopefully, as long as we make it through plow day, that's the main thing. So the next thing I'm going to do is get these wheel weights mounted up. These are from a Jacobsen, and I do like these ones a lot better than the normal wheel weights with the hole in the middle, because when you rub up against stuff or you're going through the woods or anything like that, everything just sort of glides right over the top of them. And they also get a pretty fair amount of heft to them as well. So we get these bolts pulled out of here and get them up into the wheels and see how we're setting, because I don't know if I'm going to need shorter bolts or if we'll have to cut these down. But anyways, let's get cracking on that. So as you can see, I have a few lock washers sitting behind that nut there just to take up on the shoulder of the bolt. I don't have any shorter carriage bolts, so we're going to use the original ones here. I cleaned everything up on the wire wheel. So we're just going to nip off about 3/4 of an inch of threads there. That way it cleans everything up. And these do clear the brake band brackets here, but just for the sake of neatening it up so I don't have a bunch of threads sticking off, we're just going to nip all the ends of them, and then we can get these wheel weights bolted onto the wheels. lock washers worked out well, taking up the slack on the back of these where the shoulder was. And it was just enough where I could still use the original bolts and get these tightened down. So get the other side mounted up and be all set. Like it was nothing. Well folks, plow day went pretty well this year. I only ended up running into 2 issues with the 4-wheel drive here, one of which was the 3-point hitch. As you can see, I have a strap that's holding it up right now. When I was going between fields by the end of the day on Saturday, it would not hold the plow up anymore. And then unfortunately it was also having issues pulling the plow out of the ground at the end of the furrow. So I believe it's a combination of both the hydraulic control valve and the hydraulic pump. The valve's leaking by, and most likely the pump is getting pretty darn weak. But it's still working enough where I can steer this thing around when it's running. So those will both have to get addressed in due time before the next plow day. And along with that, my rear tires ended up going too. As you can see here on the left, I got a pretty big gash in the side. There's 2 of them. 2 ended up popping, and then the right one here is not far behind. As you can see, the cords are coming through. So unfortunately, these tires were a lot more dry rotted than I thought, and they do get pretty well fatigued when you're plowing because it kind of takes a toll on the tires, dragging the plow through the ground. But aside from that, those are the only 2 issues that I ran into. Transmissions all worked well. I got plenty of oil in it this year, this time again, and of course the engine ran nice too. So I most likely put about 6 or 7 hours of plowing on this thing, if I had to guess, between Friday and Saturday. But everything went really well, and I'm glad I went down there. It was really nice to spend some time on this and spend the weekend plowing. So anyways folks, there you have it. That's Plow Day 2024 on the 4-wheel drive Gravely tractor.